Hello and welcome to Lesson 4 of Web Design and Development for Higher Computing Science. In the last video we used some semantic tags, but it still looks like a National 5 website. Well, it looks even worse because of the colour scheme we've chosen. But there's nothing about this website that tells me it was made by a higher computing pupil. So let's learn some CSS that will make it look higher level. If we read the course specification for Higher Computing Science, you'll see it asks us to describe, exemplify and implement efficient inline, internal and external cascading style sheets using grouping and descendant selectors. That's all very fancy stuff, but first we're going to learn all the different styles that we can apply at higher level, and then we'll look at grouping, descendant selectors and making it efficient. First we're going to look at display. If we go to W3 Schools, a website that I highly recommend, we can find out all about the display CSS property. There are many different values that you can assign to the display property, but the only ones we care about are block, inline, and none. Let's take a look at block elements first. A block element is any element that takes up the entire width of the page and has its own horizontal space. If we take a look at this top heading, you can see that it takes up the entire width of this page. You can see by the background colour that it's taking up the entire width. Now I didn't set the width, and we can look at the style. Our heading element doesn't have a width. All it has is a background colour of yellow. You can see it's been aligned to the centre. We've set its font size and its font family. So this is a block element. Nothing can take up the same horizontal space, so to the left or right of it, and it takes up the entire width. Now I could change the width of a block element. Let me show you that. I can set the width of this heading to, let's say, 300 pixels. I'll save, I'll refresh. Now you see how the width of this element has shrunk. Now it's still a block element, it's still reserving the entire width of the page, because you can see that this element doesn't appear alongside it. And it's still centered within the element itself, within the width of it, but it's reserving that whole space. Let me show you another example. These H4 elements are block elements. Let me prove it to you. If I style the H4 to have a background color of yellow, you'll see that they take up the entire width and they cannot appear side by side. That's a block element. So headings are block elements. You can see that this H1 is a block element, these H4s are block elements, and this H2 is a block element. You might not be able to tell that, but this paragraph has room to go side by side, but it won't because the heading is a block element. The paragraph itself is a block element as well. That's why this image, despite having room to go to the side of this paragraph, won't, because the paragraph is a block element. And if I add more paragraphs, I could add another paragraph, and I could add a couple more, and save and refresh. You'll see that these paragraphs will not appear side by side because they are block elements. Okay, are you getting the idea? One more thing about block elements. As I said, they take up the entire width of the page. Now you might think, oh, hang on, but we set the width of this heading. It's not taking up the width of the whole page. But technically it still is. You see how these H4s are also block elements, and when I hover, even over the background color, it's still a link. See how my pointer becomes a finger? If I click on art over here, it takes me there. Okay? These are taking up the entire width. Well, if I go back to my styles and I set the width of this H4 to be slightly smaller, let's say 200 pixels, now it's only taking up a little slice of the page, right? But look, when I hover my mouse to the right, it still thinks that this is a link, because it technically does go all the way from this left portion here, all the way to the right, whee, and it's still a link, there we are, over here. So I can go to the home page, the art page, computing, and so on, okay, by using my mouse hovering over here. So it's still a link. It still takes up the entire width of the page, even if the background color does not. The background color shows the width that we've set, but it's still taking up the entire width of the page. Okay, block elements kind of done. Let's take a look at inline. Now you can probably guess that if a block element takes up the whole width of the page, an inline element won't. and they can go side by side to be in the same line. Let's make it so that these H4 elements can be displayed in line. Let's try that. What do you think will happen when I refresh this page? Oh, beautiful. Doesn't this look much better? I agree. Now, one thing to keep in mind, once you've set an element to be in line, you can no longer set its height and width. So we can take this away, bloop, save this, refresh, because it was doing nothing anyway. But on every page, now our links are side by side. So technically speaking, we have created a horizontal navigation bar just by using one property, display inline. Now the final display property that we need to learn is none. And you might think, hang on a minute, what's this going to do? Is it going to remove the element from the page? Well, let's have a look. Let's say that main, let's just choose main, and let's give it a display property of none. We'll save this, save, go to our website, and this main element is this entire blue area here, because in our CSS, main has a background color of light blue. We're setting it to display none. Have a guess. What do you think is going to happen if I refresh this page? You're right, it disappears. It does not display. It has a display of none. This can be very useful, and you're probably thinking, what is the point of that? Why would you create an element in HTML and then in the CSS remove it from the page? Well, this will make much more sense when we start to use JavaScript. Down here, we can use one of these events to change the display property. So if I click on something, it can change the display property of something else and show it. And we could show things on mouse hover. So on mouse over is when you hover over something, it could display something else. And likewise, when we stop hovering, it might change it back to a display of none to hide it. But that's for a future video. Today we've learned about block elements that take up the entire width of the page, and inline elements that don't, as well as those that have a display property of none which don't show up at all. Now I'm not wanting to hide my main content area, so let's remove it, save it, and refresh. I want to see these elements. But it's good to know. So that's the first CSS property, display. I hope you've enjoyed this one, and I'll see you in the next one.